The courtroom smelled of polished wood and fear. Harper Green, 12, sat in the far back corner, her small frame hunched, knees pulled tightly to her chest. She held a frayed notebook like it was a lifeline. Her dark hair fell over her face, hiding eyes that had seen too much too soon. Around her, the room hummed with murmurs, the shuffle of papers, the subtle creak of chairs, and the low hum of whispered speculation. Adults leaned in, trying to catch glimpses of her expression, but Harper remained a statue of silence. Her mother, Rachel Green, sat beside her, pale and trembling, her hands clutching Harper's like she was trying to keep her tethered to the world. "Breathe, baby," she whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. "Just breathe." But Harper didn't respond. She hadn't for nearly a year. Not to her mother, not to therapists, not even to the police who had investigated the trauma that had shattered her family. Harper's silence wasn't ordinary. It was a fortress, built stone by stone around a child too afraid to speak, too scarred to trust. Across the room, Mark Leland, her former stepfather, sat with his arms crossed and jaw tight. He looked composed, calm even, but there was a subtle tremor in his fingers. The courtroom didn't know it yet, but he was terrified. The man had built his life on control, on secrecy, on making sure no one ever saw the truth of what he had done. And yet, here he was, facing a courtroom full of people who were beginning to realize that the quiet girl in the corner might be the most dangerous witness he had ever underestimated. The judge, a tall woman with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, rapped the gavel once. The courtroom's chatter stilled immediately. "We are here for the custody hearing of Harper Green," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I expect decorum and respect for all parties, especially the child." Her eyes briefly flicked toward Harper, who didn't move. The silence in the room deepened. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something no one could predict. Ranger, the courtroom's K-9 companion, entered then. He was a massive golden retriever trained to comfort traumatized minors. His coat gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his calm, intelligent eyes scanned the room before settling on Harper. The dog's handler, Officer Jenna Wyatt, followed behind, leash in hand, watching Harper closely. She had worked with trauma-exposed children before, but there was something different about Harper. A stillness that was almost magnetic, drawing Ranger's attention instantly. The murmurs grew again. Children weren't supposed to have this kind of aura in a courtroom. Adults weren't supposed to feel their presence like this. Ranger slowed, sniffing the air, head tilting slightly, ears forward. Harper felt it. Something deep inside her shifted, a flicker of recognition. She had met dogs like Ranger before, dogs trained for protection and obedience. But she had also learned the hard way that some dogs could be manipulated by the wrong hands. She glanced up briefly, meeting Ranger's steady gaze. The dog didn't move away, didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply watched, as though waiting for her to decide whether to speak. Rachel Green leaned closer to Harper, whispering, "Honey, it's okay. You can say something if you want." Harper's lips didn't move, she didn't even blink. Her silence was total, and yet it was a language of its own, a language that the courtroom was slowly beginning to notice. Harper had been through counseling sessions where therapists had cried in frustration. Police officers had begged. Teachers had pleaded. Nothing had worked. She wouldn't speak to anyone but herself, and now perhaps to Ranger. The bailiff stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Shall we proceed?" he asked, though no one in the room could fully hear him over the tension. Harper's eyes, previously downcast, flicked toward the judge. There was something sharp in them now, a spark that no one had seen in months. Her hand twitched over the notebook's cover, gripping it like a talisman. Harper had something to say, but she hadn't yet chosen the moment or the audience. The defense attorney, a tall man with slick-back hair and a practiced smile, approached the bench. He glanced at Harper with a mixture of curiosity and condescension, as if daring the quiet girl to do something. He didn't know that Harper had been silently observing him for weeks. She had memorized every gesture, every inflection, every slight smirk. Every time he underestimated her, it fueled the fire burning quietly inside her chest. Today, that fire would not be contained forever. Meanwhile, the prosecutor leaned over to the judge, whispering in low tones. She had been preparing for months, gathering evidence, tracing the trail of Harper's trauma, noting inconsistencies in Mark Leland's accounts. But there was one element she couldn't quantify, one variable she couldn't control: the silent girl and the K-9 that had inexplicably chosen her. She had never seen Harper react to anyone in her courtroom. And yet here, the dog's behavior suggested a connection, a recognition, an understanding that no adult could possibly explain. The gallery held its breath. Journalists scribbled frantically, cameras clicking, but no one moved toward Harper. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy with the feeling that something was about to break, though no one could yet see the fracture line. Harper felt it too. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, planning how to protect herself, how to reveal the truth without speaking to anyone who might twist it. And now, finally, she understood the power she had, even in silence. Ranger padded closer, his paws making soft thuds against the polished wood floor. Harper's fingers brushed over his coat, her pulse quickened. The dog's presence was grounding, anchoring her to something real, something safe. And in that moment, Harper realized that she could speak, if only to him, not to the judge, not to the adults, not to the reporters, just to Ranger, just enough to convey the truth she had kept locked inside for far too long. Her mother leaned in again, whispering encouragement, unaware of the small, private exchange about to unfold between Harper and Ranger. Harper hesitated, then slowly, ever so slowly, leaned forward. Her voice, soft as a sigh, barely a whisper, reached Ranger's ears. "She knows." The words were fragile, almost fragile enough to be missed by anyone else in the room. But Ranger's reaction was immediate. His ears perked, tail lifted slightly, and he took a careful step closer to Harper, as though acknowledging a bond that transcended human understanding. Harper felt the tension in the courtroom shift, felt the collective gaze of everyone around her turn to the dog, then back to her, uncertain, confused. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Did the child just speak?" she asked, her voice steady but her brow furrowed. No one moved. The room was frozen. Even Mark Leland's lawyer, confident for the first time all morning, felt an unexplainable chill crawl down his spine. Harper's whisper had done something that no testimony, no report, no evidence could do. It commanded attention. It shifted the balance of power in the room. Ranger's handler, Officer Jenna Wyatt, stepped closer, careful not to break the fragile connection between dog and child. Her voice was low, almost reverent. "Your Honor, I think the dog recognized something important." The judge leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "Explain." Jenna hesitated, glancing at Harper. The girl's eyes met hers briefly, then flicked away. "It's difficult to describe," Jenna said. "This dog is trained to detect stress, fear, and sometimes signs of trauma in children. He only responds this way when he senses something significant, and right now, he has chosen this child." Murmurs began to ripple through the courtroom, a quiet undercurrent of tension, curiosity, and disbelief. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Mark's face hardened. He had faced many challenges in court, but a silent child commanding the attention of a trained K-9 was unprecedented. Harper's fingers trembled over Ranger's fur. She hadn't planned for the public spectacle, hadn't intended to draw every eye in the room to her trembling frame. But as she felt the dog's reassuring weight against her hand, she understood something critical. She was no longer entirely alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, this silent guardian could help her finally tell the truth that had been trapped inside her for so long. Then Harper whispered again, slightly louder this time, just enough for Ranger and Jenna to hear. "He trained dogs too." The words hung in the air. The courtroom froze. Every head turned toward the quietest corner, toward the girl who had not spoken in a year, toward the dog who had just recognized her truth. Mark Leland's face went pale, almost as if he had been struck. His hands trembled. The lawyer stiffened. The judge stared, gavel poised midair. For the first time, Harper allowed herself a tiny, almost imperceptible smile. Not for the courtroom, not for the adults, not for the cameras, but for herself. The first step had been taken. Her silence was no longer a prison. It was a weapon. And for the first time in over a year, Harper felt the weight of possibility, the possibility that the truth might finally be heard. The room held its collective breath. No one moved. Every eye was on Harper and Ranger. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, a single thread between fear and revelation. And then the judge spoke, barely above a whisper. "I want the child to continue." Harper looked at Ranger. The dog's steady gaze gave her courage. And in that fragile moment, Harper knew she was ready to speak. Not to the adults, not to the world, not yet, but to the one being who had understood her without a word. And for the first time in a long year, the quietest girl in the room began to write a message that would change everything. The courtroom sat in a stunned hush. Harper Green's whisper, barely audible to anyone but Ranger and his handler, had fractured the air like a lightning bolt. He trained dogs too, 4 words, and yet the weight of them pressed on the room like a physical force. Adults shifted uneasily in their seats. Mark Leland's jaw tightened so hard it looked as though it might crack. Even the judge, usually unshakable, paused mid-breath, gavel poised, unsure of how to proceed. Ranger, massive and golden, didn't move immediately. He simply froze, his head cocked slightly, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air around Harper. His tail, usually a calm pendulum, lifted stiffly. Every muscle in his body vibrated with alertness. Officer Jenna Wyatt, his handler, frowned. She tugged lightly on his leash, but Ranger resisted, his eyes locked on Harper as if she were the only thing that mattered in the room. "What is he doing?" someone whispered behind her. Jenna's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer immediately. Ranger had been trained for years to react to signs of trauma in children, to comfort and protect, to alert authorities when a child needed help. But what he was doing now went beyond any training protocol. He was recognizing something personal, something dangerous. And Jenna didn't yet understand what. Harper felt it too. The subtle vibration in Ranger's stance, the way his eyes never left her face, triggered a long-buried memory she had buried deep inside her mind. The memory of Mark Leland's obsession with control, his cruel manipulation, and the terrifying experiments with the family dogs. How he had trained them to respond to commands she couldn't understand, and how she had survived only by staying quiet, invisible, unnoticed. Her hands trembled slightly as she brushed them over Ranger's fur. He was warm, solid, real, an anchor in the storm. Harper had almost forgotten what it felt like to be safe. Almost. And now, in the courtroom, with every eye on her, she realized she wasn't invisible anymore. She had a witness who didn't need words, and maybe, just maybe, she could use him to finally tell the truth. "Judge, you need to hear this," Jenna said, stepping forward carefully, her voice low but trembling with a mixture of awe and fear. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Explain, Officer Wyatt, what is the dog doing?" Jenna took a deep breath. "Your Honor, Ranger only reacts this way when he detects trauma patterns similar to another case he's trained to identify. He's focusing on this child for a reason. I believe Harper may be connected to something he's recognized as dangerous." The murmurs in the courtroom swelled. Reporters clicked cameras, pens flew across notepads, and a few spectators craned their necks to see Harper more clearly. The girl remained frozen, hands lightly resting on Ranger's head, eyes wide but steady. She hadn't spoken a word to anyone except the dog, yet she had already shifted the balance of attention in the courtroom completely. Mark Leland leaned forward, his knuckles white around the edges of the defense table, his lips pressed into a tight line. Something in his posture gave him away, fear. Not the fear of being exposed for minor infractions, but the fear of long-buried truths, secrets that could ruin him entirely if revealed. And he knew, deep down, that Harper held the key. Can the child speak to the dog?" the judge asked cautiously, her voice carrying the authority of the room yet tinged with hesitation. Rachel Green's eyes widened. "Honey," she whispered, but Harper didn't turn toward her. She had found a strange courage in Ranger's steady gaze, a courage that had nothing to do with her mother, the adults, or even the judge. This was hers alone. Harper leaned slightly closer to Ranger and whispered again, just enough for the dog to hear, not the adults. Her words were soft, careful, deliberate. He made them do it. Ranger's reaction was immediate. He barked once, sharp, precise, a signal he had been trained to give only when recognizing a known threat. Officer Wyatt's eyes widened. This wasn't normal. Children's reactions could be unpredictable, but Ranger had never barked like this unless he was confirming a pattern from his prior training, patterns connected to prior criminal cases involving abuse and manipulation. The courtroom froze, gasps swept the room. The judge leaned forward, demanding clarification. "Officer Wyatt, are you saying?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jenna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The dog is confirming that Harper's statements match behaviors he has previously recognized in a prior case. This is extremely rare and extremely significant." Harper felt a small thrill of vindication mixed with fear. She had feared this moment for months, being seen, being heard, being scrutinized. But she also knew that Ranger was on her side. That meant she could take the next step. She whispered again, slightly louder this time. "He made the dogs attack me." A collective shudder rippled through the courtroom. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously. Mark's face went pale, his confidence crumbling. He opened his mouth, but no words came. For once, he was powerless in the face of a truth he had thought buried forever. The prosecutor sprang to her feet. "Your Honor, this is a significant development. If the child can identify patterns of abuse that were trained into animals, it corroborates evidence that we've been unable to prove until now. We need to consider this testimony immediately." The defense attorney jumped to object, shouting over the room, "This is preposterous. A dog cannot be a witness. This is theatrics, circus behavior to manipulate the jury and the court." But no one was listening. Every eye in the courtroom was on Harper. She had become the axis around which the room rotated, the still point of tension that everyone, judges, lawyers, reporters, spectators, couldn't look away from. Harper's hands shook as she ran them over Ranger's fur, grounding herself. Memories that had been locked away for safety now surged forward. The nights Mark had shouted commands, the way the dogs had obeyed him without question, the fear she had endured in silence. And now she had a voice. Not a loud voice, not one anyone else would hear, but a voice that mattered. A voice that could finally, carefully, reveal the truth. She whispered one more time, "He recorded it all." The words were small, fragile, almost imperceptible, but Ranger reacted instantly, barking twice in precise succession. Officer Wyatt's face drained of color. That's a signal. Only when he recognizes repeated trauma patterns linked to evidence. Harper, she's not just recounting events. She's triggering recognition of actual documented abuse. Mark Leland froze. His eyes widened and his hands clenched so hard that his knuckles turned white. The confidence he had projected throughout the morning, the mask of calm, shattered like glass. He had trained dogs before, yes, but the possibility that Harper could identify his methods, and that a trained K9 could confirm it, was something he hadn't prepared for. Rachel Green's hand found Harper's arm. "Are you okay, baby?" she whispered. Harper nodded slightly, feeling a surge of adrenaline. She had been invisible for so long, silenced by fear and manipulation, but now she mattered. Now she was seen, and perhaps finally she could be heard. The judge exhaled slowly. "Let's take a brief recess while we assess this situation," she said, trying to regain control of the room. "But no one leaves. This is extraordinary." As the room began to stir, whispering and murmuring like a restless tide, Harper stayed still, leaning into Ranger's warmth. The dog's head rested lightly on her lap, his eyes locked on hers. They shared a silent understanding, a bond forged in trauma, fear, and the instinct to survive. Harper had faced down the world in silence. Now, with Ranger as her witness and her shield, she was ready to take the next step. But as everyone filed out for recess, Mark's eyes never left Harper. There was a mixture of anger and fear there, an unspoken threat that chilled the air. He knew she had power now, power he couldn't control, and he would do anything to silence it. Harper exhaled softly, hands gripping Ranger's fur tightly. Her mind raced with possibilities, fear, and strategy. She had one small voice, one loyal dog, and a mind sharp enough to navigate the labyrinth of adult manipulation. And if she used them correctly, she could finally expose the truth. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered about the miracle dog and the silent child. Inside, lawyers scrambled to assess the implications, but Harper ignored them all. She only had eyes for Ranger, the dog who had recognized her trauma, the companion who had acknowledged her story, even without words. And Harper knew something crucial. The next move had to be precise. Every whisper, every gesture, every look could shift the balance. She leaned forward again, pressing her forehead lightly to Ranger, whispering a single command only he would understand. Ranger's tail thumped once, deliberately, signaling readiness. Harper's voice was almost inaudible, but her eyes blazed with determination. They'll see it all, they have to see it. The room outside the corner of her vision was a battlefield of adults, lawyers, and authority figures, but Harper no longer felt small. With Ranger at her side, the silent child had become an agent of truth. And as the gavel echoed through the room signaling recess, a subtle tension lingered. Everyone knew the story was just beginning, and that the quietest girl in the room had just unleashed the first ripple of a truth that would not stay hidden. The courtroom held its collective breath, and Harper's whispered words hung in the air, a prelude to chaos. They won't expect what comes next. The courtroom was a silent storm. Harper Green sat perched on the edge of her chair, hands trembling slightly over Ranger's head, her notebook pressed to her chest. Every eye in the room was on her, but she wasn't looking at any of them. She was looking only at Ranger, the golden retriever who had become her shield, her witness, and the only being she trusted. The dog's head rested lightly on her lap, ears forward, eyes alert. The subtle vibrations of his body mirrored the tension inside Harper's chest. Officer Jenna Wyatt, Ranger's handler, swallowed hard. Her fingers clutched the leash, though she knew she could barely control Ranger in this moment. He was attuned to Harper's trauma, her memories, her unspoken truths. He understood danger, he understood fear, and he understood patterns of abuse that no human could grasp. And now he had confirmed that Harper's words were not just random whispers. They were recognition of a methodical cruelty executed by Mark Leland. Jenna stepped carefully toward the judge's bench. Every movement was deliberate. She knew the courtroom was watching, waiting for her to speak, but her throat felt constricted. This was unlike any case she had encountered. Usually, Ranger's alerts were handled privately, quietly. Not in a packed courtroom with cameras flashing, reporters scribbling, and the accused glaring at a child like she was a threat. "Your Honor," Jenna's voice cracked slightly, betraying the gravity of the moment. The judge leaned forward, sensing the urgency. "Yes, Officer Wyatt." Jenna glanced at Harper, whose gaze remained locked on Ranger. "The child." She said something to Ranger that no one else could hear, just 4 words. "He trained dogs too." A low murmur spread through the courtroom. The words seemed simple, almost childlike, but their implications were staggering. Mark's face drained of color, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for a child to identify patterns he had thought were invisible, untraceable. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Mitchell, rose to her feet immediately. "Your Honor," she said, her voice tight with controlled excitement, "if the child's observation can be verified through Ranger's reaction, it becomes evidence that corroborates the abuse we've long suspected but could not prove. This changes the case entirely." The defense attorney, a tall, fast-talking man named Peter Lawson, jumped up in indignation. "Objection! This is preposterous. A dog cannot validate human testimony. The child is being coached, manipulated. This is theater." Jenna shook her head quickly. No, I assure you this is not theater. Ranger's behavior is trained. He only responds in this manner when he recognizes a specific pattern of trauma he has encountered before. The child's words triggered that recognition. This is not manipulation, it's confirmation. The judge, a woman whose reputation for calm authority was known statewide, rapped her gavel lightly. Order! Mr. Lawson, please control yourself. Officer Wyatt, continue. Jenna took a deep breath, her eyes flicking to Harper once more. Harper has been silent for nearly a year. No therapist, no officer, no family member could get a full sentence from her. Yet now, when she speaks to Ranger, he responds. He recognizes danger, abuse patterns, and Jenna hesitated, glancing toward the defense table. He recognizes the methods used by Mark Leland specifically. The courtroom exhaled in tension. A shiver ran through the gallery. Mark's fingers clenched the edge of the table, his jaw twitching. He was angry, terrified, and cornered all at once. The years of carefully hidden lies were collapsing in real time, exposed by a child and a dog working in silent unison. Harper's mother, Rachel, sat rigid in her seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wanted to speak, to reassure her daughter, to tell her she was safe. But she understood instinctively that this moment wasn't about her. This moment belonged entirely to Harper. Her daughter was reclaiming her voice, slowly, deliberately, in a way that no adult could control. Your Honor, Jenna continued, her voice steadying, Ranger's reaction is extremely rare. He has never responded this way to a child without documented trauma. Harper's words, her recognition, triggered a response that we can verify. The judge leaned back, absorbing the weight of the testimony. She had presided over hundreds of cases, seen countless witnesses, heard countless accounts of trauma. But never had she seen a courtroom silenced by the response of a dog, nor a child who had been silent for months suddenly command attention in this way. Mark's face paled further. His eyes darted nervously to his lawyer. Peter Lawson opened his mouth to speak, but the words faltered. He knew, deep down, that the narrative he had rehearsed for weeks was unraveling. A dog had become the witness, and a child's voice, long buried and nearly broken, was the key. Harper shifted slightly, her fingers brushing Ranger's coat. The dog leaned closer, pressing his body gently against her legs. She whispered again, just to him, barely audible. He told them to go after me. Ranger barked twice, sharp and deliberate, the kind of alert he had only ever given in situations that confirmed a pattern of known abuse. Jenna's hands shook as she clutched the leash. The prosecutor's eyes widened. The judge's hand rested lightly on the gavel, and Mark Leland's face twisted into something between horror and rage. The room erupted with murmurs, but Harper remained still, almost statuesque, as if the world around her had slowed. She had become the center of attention without even trying. Her voice was quiet, but her words were powerful enough to fracture the courtroom's calm. "This is extraordinary," the prosecutor said, rising from her seat. "If the child's words can be verified through Ranger's behavior, this could be the evidence needed to finally prove the abuse that has been suspected but never documented." Mark's voice finally broke through, trembling with forced control. "Objection! This is manipulation. The child is being influenced by the dog. This is a setup." Jenna shook her head firmly. "No, sir. The child has not been influenced. She has been silent for months. The dog's response was triggered entirely by the recognition of trauma. It is her own memory, her own experience being confirmed." The judge's gaze swept the room, taking in the tension, the fear, the anticipation. She rapped the gavel firmly. "Order! This courtroom will maintain decorum. Mr. Leland, you may not interrupt further. Officer Wyatt, continue." Jenna's voice steadied, though her hands remained slightly shaky. "Your Honor, I recommend that Harper be allowed to communicate further with Ranger in a controlled setting. This is not just a matter of comfort. It is a matter of gathering critical information that only this child can provide." Her words, in conjunction with Ranger's responses, may reveal patterns of abuse that cannot otherwise be documented. Harper's hands tightened over Ranger's coat. She felt a surge of both fear and empowerment. She had been invisible for so long, and yet here she was, commanding attention through the bond she shared with a dog. She whispered again, just to Ranger. He recorded everything. Ranger barked sharply 3 times. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. The prosecutor's eyes widened. The courtroom gasped collectively. Mark Leland's face drained of color. He knew that what Harper had just revealed, what the dog had just confirmed, was the kind of evidence that could destroy him. The judge leaned forward, gavel hovering above the bench. "Explain, Officer Wyatt," she said softly. "What does this mean?" Jenna glanced at Harper, who nodded slightly, then back at the judge. "Your Honor, Ranger only responds in this manner when a trauma pattern has been documented or is highly recognizable." Harper's words triggered a recognition of prior abuse methods, including recording and manipulation. This is not conjecture. It is confirmation that the child's testimony matches known patterns. A low murmur ran through the courtroom. Mark's lawyer whispered urgently to him, but his face betrayed him. Harper's eyes, steady and unwavering, met her former stepfather's. There was no fear now, only clarity, only truth. Rachel Green let out a shaky breath, tears welling in her eyes. Her daughter, her silent, broken, frightened daughter, was standing on the precipice of reclaiming her life. And she had done it without a word to the adults. All it had taken was a whisper to a dog who understood. The judge exhaled slowly. "We will take a brief recess," she said, "to assess the implications of this new development. No one leaves the courtroom. I want a full review of the situation before we continue." Mark slumped back into his chair, visibly shaken. For the first time, the confident mask he wore for weeks cracked. His carefully constructed facade of control had been shattered by a 12-year-old girl and a golden retriever. Harper exhaled slowly, pressing her forehead lightly against Ranger's head. Her hands shook, but her resolve had never been stronger. She had begun to speak, begun to reveal the truth. And she had an ally who understood her, who could confirm her story in ways that no adult could ignore. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered, cameras clicked, and the tension was palpable. But inside the corner where Harper and Ranger sat, the air was calm, electric, and full of unspoken possibilities. Harper's eyes met Ranger's once more, and she whispered with quiet determination, "They'll never see what comes next." The court had seen the first ripple. The storm was just beginning. The courtroom felt heavier, as though the air itself had thickened. Every whisper, every scratch of a pen, every shuffle of a chair seemed amplified. Harper Green remained in her corner, fingers brushing Ranger's fur, notebook pressed to her chest. The dog's eyes never left hers, a silent anchor amidst the storm of whispers and tension surrounding them. The events of the morning had set the room on edge, but no one, including the adults in power, could have anticipated what Harper was about to reveal next. Harper's voice, long silenced, trembled as she leaned slightly toward Ranger, whispering just enough for him to hear. He told them everything. Ranger's ears perked sharply. His body stiffened. Officer Jenna Wyatt stepped closer, face pale. The dog had just given the alert of confirmation, the kind of recognition that was trained to signify extreme danger and truth. In the courtroom, it was as if time had slowed. Adults froze mid-motion, cameras clicked rapidly, and Mark Leland's eyes widened in terror. His hand tightened on the defense table as if to hold himself together. "Your Honor," Jenna's voice cracked, hesitant yet commanding. "The dog is signaling that the child's statement matches documented abusive behavior he has previously recognized. This is highly unusual and significant." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Documented behavior?" she asked, leaning forward. "Explain." Jenna swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor. Ranger only reacts this way to patterns he has learned to recognize from prior cases. cases involving abuse, manipulation, and training of animals to commit acts of aggression against children. Harper's statements triggered recognition. The room collectively inhaled. Murmurs swept the courtroom, but Harper's gaze never wavered. She had rehearsed this moment for months in her mind, silently scripting the words she could only speak to Ranger. The dog's recognition had given her courage to push forward. And now she did something no one expected. She raised her voice, soft but firm, and said words the courtroom could hear. "He made the dogs attack me." Gasps erupted. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously. The defense attorney's jaw slackened, while Mark's face drained of color. For the first time in the courtroom that day, he had no retort, no strategy, no plan. The carefully built facade of innocence he had maintained for years was cracking under the weight of a child's whispered truths and a dog's trained intuition. The prosecutor, Sarah Mitchell, sprang to her feet. "Your Honor, this is critical. If the child's statements can be verified through the dog's reaction, it corroborates the abuse we've been investigating for months but could not prove. We must reconsider the evidence immediately." Peter Lawson, Mark's defense attorney, rose abruptly, his voice loud and urgent. "Objection! This is absurd. A dog cannot testify. A child's whisper does not constitute evidence. This is manipulation and theatrics." Jenna shook her head. "It's neither theatrics nor manipulation," she said firmly. "The child has not spoken to anyone for nearly a year. Her communication with Ranger is spontaneous. The dog's response is scientifically trained, not influenced. Harper's words match patterns Ranger has been trained to recognize. This is confirmation, not fabrication." The judge rapped the gavel sharply. "Order, Mr. Lawson, you will hold your objections. Officer Wyatt, continue." Jenna's hands trembled slightly, but she pressed forward. "Your Honor, I believe Harper can provide additional information that may further corroborate the patterns of abuse. Her communication with Ranger is the only way we can access it safely. The child has been traumatized, but this connection allows her to reveal details that adults cannot coax from her otherwise." Harper's chest tightened. She hadn't intended to speak to the courtroom directly, only to Ranger, but now the judge had opened the door. She leaned forward slightly, whispering again to the dog. "There's more, show them." Ranger barked sharply twice, the signal she had been waiting for. Jenna's eyes widened. The prosecutor blinked in disbelief. The courtroom gasped. Harper's mother buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly, overwhelmed by the knowledge that her daughter was finally taking control of her story. Mark's face turned ashen. He had trained dogs before, yes, but he had never anticipated that a child could trigger recognition in a trained K9. The system he had relied on to protect him, silence, manipulation, and fear, was failing, completely, and the realization brought panic. Harper adjusted her notebook, opening it carefully. Inside were drawings, scribbled notes, and small observations she had recorded in secrecy over the past months. She pulled one piece free and pressed it into Jenna's hands. "Read it," she whispered softly. Jenna unfolded the paper. The handwriting was small, almost imperceptible, but the content was clear. Locations, dates, times, and details of Mark's abusive patterns. The officer's eyes widened as she recognized the alignment with documented prior cases. Harper had documented everything in secret, knowing she could not rely on adults to believe her. The prosecutor's voice shook with urgency. "Your Honor, this is evidence we need to act on immediately. It contains corroboration of prior incidents, locations, and behaviors that match the child's statements and the dog's alerts. We cannot ignore it." Mark's lips quivered. He had anticipated courtroom challenges, cross-examinations, and legal maneuvering, but never this. A 12-year-old girl, silent for a year, had become the linchpin in exposing his crimes, and the dog, an untrained witness in the eyes of the court, was confirming every detail he had hoped would remain hidden. The judge leaned back, taking in the gravity of the situation. We will recess briefly to verify the information and determine how to proceed. No one is to leave this courtroom until we resume. This is unprecedented." Mark slumped back in his chair, hands trembling, the veneer of confidence gone. For the first time, he was confronted with a truth that he could not control or deny. Harper had begun dismantling his carefully constructed lies with nothing but whispered words, a dog, and her own hidden records. Harper exhaled, pressing her forehead gently against Ranger's head. The dog nuzzled her hand in return, grounding her. She had taken the first step, but she knew the battle was far from over. Mark Leland would fight back, and the courtroom would become a battlefield of lies, fear, and revelation. But for the first time in over a year, Harper felt a sense of power. She had found a way to be heard. Outside the corner of her vision, the gallery whispered excitedly. Reporters scribbled notes feverishly. Some speculated on the miracle child and the miracle dog, but Harper ignored them. This was not a story for headlines, it was the truth, and she intended to deliver it fully. The judge's gaze returned to Harper. "Do you wish to add anything before we recess?" she asked. Harper looked at Ranger. He gazed back, calm and steady, his presence reassuring. She nodded slightly and whispered again, loud enough for the court to hear this time. "He kept recordings of everything." The room froze. Cameras clicked frantically. The prosecution gasped. Mark's eyes widened in sheer horror. His secret, the one thing he thought invulnerable, had just been revealed by a 12-year-old girl who had been silent for months, and confirmed by a dog. The judge leaned forward, gavel raised. "We will reconvene shortly. No one leaves the courtroom." Mark's panic was visible now. His hands shook, voice quivering as he muttered, "No, this can't be happening," under his breath. The defense attorney tried to regain control, but even he understood the magnitude of the situation. Harper pressed her hand lightly to Ranger's head, whispering softly, "They won't expect the storage." Ranger barked once sharply. The subtle signal sent chills through the courtroom. Everyone, prosecutors, defense, media, spectators, felt the weight of the moment. Harper wasn't finished, not even close. The gallery held its collective breath, the tension palpable. Everyone knew, instinctively, that this quiet girl had only just begun to expose the darkness that had haunted her life. And in the corner, Harper allowed herself the faintest, almost imperceptible smile. The quietest child in the courtroom had become the center of attention, and she held the key to a truth no one expected, one that could unravel Mark Leland completely. As the gavel fell, signaling recess, the courtroom buzzed with tension, fear, and curiosity. But Harper and Ranger remained still, connected, unshakable, ready for the next move. Harper whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, "They're going to see everything, and they'll never forget it." The storm had only just begun. The courtroom reconvened, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. A low hum of tension vibrated in the air, charged with fear, anticipation, and disbelief. Harper Green remained in her corner, small and quiet, but she radiated an intensity no one could ignore. Ranger sat beside her, massive and alert, tail sweeping softly against the floor as if marking the invisible boundary of safety and danger. Every eye in the room was drawn to them. The girl who had not spoken for a year, and the dog who seemed to understand more than any human could. Harper's mother, Rachel, clenched her hands together tightly, nails biting into her palms. She was terrified yet proud. Her daughter was no longer just a victim, she was a force. Rachel knew Harper had survived months of abuse by learning to stay silent, to watch, to memorize every cruel detail. But now, silence had become her weapon, her words delivered through Ranger's reactions. And the adults around her were finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of her courage. The judge tapped the gavel lightly. "We will continue. Officer Wyatt, please explain the next steps." Jenna took a deep breath, glancing at Harper, who nodded slightly. The plan had been rehearsed silently between them for months. Harper had memorized details, locations, and timelines. She had observed every nuance of Mark Leland's actions. Now, with Ranger's responses as confirmation, she was ready to direct the courtroom toward the first tangible evidence, the recordings he had so arrogantly hidden. "Your Honor," Jenna began, voice steady, "Harper has indicated that critical evidence exists in a storage location controlled by Mark Leland. This evidence includes recordings that document abuse and manipulation. She has identified the precise location through nonverbal communication and her own recollection." A wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. Mark's face went pale, eyes wide. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table as if he could physically hold himself together against the storm of revelation. "Objection," he barked, voice rising. "This is preposterous. The child cannot verify such claims. This is speculation." Harper's lips moved slightly, just enough for Ranger to detect her intent. "The locker," she whispered to the dog. Ranger barked sharply, the alert signal Harper had been waiting for. Jenna's eyes widened. "Your Honor, the dog is confirming the child's memory. This is not conjecture. Harper is identifying a specific location connected to documented abuse." Mark's jaw tightened, but fear now outweighed bravado. His mind raced. The recordings, the ones he had hidden in a self-rented storage locker, were his lifeline. If anyone accessed them, his carefully constructed facade of control, of innocence, would crumble. And now, thanks to Harper and her silent orchestration, the key to exposing him had emerged. The judge leaned forward. "Officer Wyatt, do you have a plan to secure the evidence and ensure it is admissible?" Jenna nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. With Harper's guidance and Ranger's verification, law enforcement can access the storage unit safely and recover the recordings. Harper's knowledge of the contents ensures accurate retrieval, while Ranger's alerts guarantee we are observing the correct evidence patterns." Harper's hands trembled slightly as she whispered to Ranger again, "Locker number 742. Ranger barked twice, deliberate. Harper's voice, though soft, was matched perfectly by the dog's trained response. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, her brow furrowed in incredulity. A child, silent for months, had just identified a storage locker and confirmed its contents through the behavior of a dog. The prosecutor stood abruptly. "Your Honor, with this information, we can immediately verify the location and content. This may be the corroboration we need to move forward with criminal charges, not just custody matters. The evidence may prove abuse beyond a shadow of a doubt." Mark's defense attorney spun in his chair, face red with frustration and panic. "This is outrageous. A dog cannot authenticate evidence. The child is being used as a tool to fabricate claims." Harper's gaze shifted toward Mark for the first time. It was not fear that she saw there, but raw, unguarded terror. She had watched him for months, memorized every twitch, every smirk, every lie. And now she held the power. She whispered again to Ranger, soft but deliberate. "They'll find it, everything." Ranger barked sharply, confirming. Officer Wyatt's hands shook as she held the leash, aware of the courtroom's eyes on them, aware that this child-dog team had become the epicenter of an unprecedented legal revelation. The judge rapped the gavel decisively. "Order! Law enforcement, please prepare to retrieve the identified evidence immediately. Mr. Leland, you will not interfere. This is extraordinary and will be documented thoroughly." Mark's face contorted in rage and fear. This is illegal. You can't just." The judge cut him off. "Silence, you will comply." Outside the courtroom, officers prepared to accompany Harper and Jenna to the storage facility. Harper's heart pounded. The lockers were cold, sterile, impersonal spaces, but they were the key to uncovering everything Mark had tried to hide. She had memorized every detail, the unit number, the combination, even the layout of the racks inside. Months of observation had turned into precise knowledge that could now be used to expose the truth. Rachel squeezed Harper's hand. "You're so brave," she whispered. Harper looked down, uncertain. She didn't feel brave. She felt terrified, but she also felt the first flicker of hope she had known in years. As they arrived at the storage facility, Harper led the officers to locker 742. She traced the lock with her small fingers, murmuring the combination. Every number clicked precisely, opening the metal door with a final, echoing thud. Inside were boxes and folders stacked meticulously, labeled in Mark's neat, obsessive handwriting. Harper's eyes scanned the contents. Every folder, every tape, every document contained pieces of a puzzle that had haunted her family. She took a deep breath, whispering to Ranger, "This is it, the proof." Ranger's tail thumped firmly against the metal frame, signaling confirmation. Officer Wyatt nodded to the team. "We have verified it. This is the correct location." Mark's face in the courtroom, viewed via live feed from the storage facility, was pale and rigid. His confidence, built over years, was evaporating before everyone's eyes. He had believed the evidence was untouchable, hidden away from all human scrutiny. But he hadn't counted on Harper, silent, observant, and fearless, and Ranger, a dog trained to detect the truth hidden in plain sight. Harper carefully lifted the first tape, holding it reverently. It was heavier than she expected. She had never handled anything like this before. Each reel, each folder contained echoes of the trauma she had endured and the evidence of Mark's manipulations. But she didn't falter. Her fingers brushed the labels, memorizing every detail, cataloging every piece of evidence for the authorities. Officer Wyatt leaned closer. "Harper, you're doing great. We're following your lead." Harper whispered almost to herself, "They'll see, they have to see it all." Back in the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Reporters leaned forward, lawyers whispered frantically, and the judge's face reflected the weight of what was about to unfold. Harper's courage, paired with Ranger's instinct, had set the stage for revelations that no one, not even Mark Leland, could have anticipated. And then Harper did something no one expected. She pressed a small recorder to the metal shelf and whispered again, "Play." The room at the storage facility filled with a faint hum. The first sounds emerged, Mark's voice, harsh and commanding, giving instructions to the dogs he had trained to terrorize and control. Harper's heart pounded. This was the evidence that had been locked away, proof of every manipulation, every threat, every secret act of cruelty. Ranger barked sharply twice, confirming the recognition of abuse patterns. Harper's chest tightened as tears formed in her eyes. She had survived, she had endured, and now the truth was finally audible, undeniable, and unstoppable. In the courtroom, Mark's face was ghostly white. He had been confident, untouchable, a master manipulator. But now the world could hear his voice. His carefully constructed illusions were crumbling, and the quietest girl in the room, the one no one expected to speak, had orchestrated it all. Harper's whisper to Ranger was barely audible. "They'll know everything now." The storm was coming, and Harper was ready. The courtroom was unnervingly silent, the air thick with anticipation. Harper Green sat in her corner, hands pressed gently against Ranger's fur, the golden retriever's massive body tense with awareness. Every movement was precise, deliberate. Every subtle shift of Harper's gaze directed Ranger's instincts. No one dared move or speak. The storm she had orchestrated from the shadows of fear was about to break, and everyone, lawyers, reporters, and the judge, felt it coming. Harper's small fingers brushed against the recorder she had guided the officers to retrieve. She inhaled, steadying herself against the sudden swell of adrenaline. This moment had been months in the making, a silent rehearsal in her mind during countless sleepless nights. She had endured abuse, manipulation, and fear, every memory sharpened like a scalpel. And now the courtroom would hear what she had never dared speak aloud. Officer Jenna Wyatt knelt beside her. "Are you ready, Harper?" she asked gently, voice calm but tense. Harper nodded slightly, pressing her forehead against Ranger's head, drawing strength from the warmth and loyalty beneath her hands. The dog's eyes locked with hers, steady, unwavering. Together they were a unit, a silent declaration of truth and survival. "Your Honor," Jenna said, rising, "we will begin playing recordings identified and verified by Harper and confirmed by Ranger. The content documents abusive behavior, manipulation, and coercion perpetrated by Mark Leland." Mark Leland's face was rigid, jaw clenched so tightly it seemed impossible he could speak. His confidence, once a mask of control, had vanished. Every whisper, every glance toward Harper, betrayed terror he had never shown in court before. The facade was gone, leaving a raw, vulnerable man facing a 12-year-old girl and a golden retriever who had, in ways no one could ignore, become the arbiters of truth. The first recording clicked to life, filling the courtroom with Mark's voice. Sharp, commanding, and cruel, it barked orders to the family dogs, directing them to intimidate, to guard, to enforce his control over a child who dared resist. Harper flinched slightly but remained composed, gripping Ranger's fur tightly. She had lived through these moments, remembered them, and now the world would listen. Gasps echoed across the room. The judge's hand hovered above the gavel, frozen in disbelief. The prosecutor rose, her face tight with suppressed emotion. "Your Honor, this recording, it confirms the abuse patterns we have suspected. This is incontrovertible evidence." Peter Lawson, Mark's attorney, sputtered, trying to regain his composure. "Objection! This is inadmissible. The chain of custody, this child, this dog, it's all unreliable." Jenna's eyes blazed with authority. "Your Honor, the chain of custody has been meticulously maintained. The child identified the evidence, and the dog confirmed the patterns of abuse. Harper's testimony, coupled with Ranger's recognition, is validated and highly reliable. This is not speculation, this is confirmation." Mark's fingers trembled on the defense table. He had believed arrogantly that the recordings were untouchable, that they were locked away, hidden behind walls of bureaucracy and secrecy. But Harper had remembered everything, guided every step, and Ranger had validated it. His worst nightmare was no longer hypothetical, it was unfolding before his eyes. Harper whispered softly to Ranger, "More, play the next one." The next tape clicked in. The sounds of threats, manipulations, and orchestrated fear filled the room. Each snippet revealed Mark's calculated cruelty, verbal intimidation, the strategic use of fear, and his insistence that silence was obedience. The courtroom reacted instantly. Reporters scribbled furiously. Spectators gasped, some covering their mouths. The prosecutor's eyes glistened with a mix of shock and determination. Harper felt a wave of nausea, but she stayed steady, gripping Ranger's fur as if his presence could shield her from the flood of memories. Every word on the tape was a mirror of what she had endured, yet it was also proof of her survival. Her whispers guided Ranger's focus, directing him toward the evidence in a silent, unspoken communication that no one else could interpret. Ranger barked sharply twice, alert signals indicating the confirmation of abuse patterns. Harper's lips moved slightly, whispering, "The third, it shows everything." The third tape played. This one was different. It contained recordings of Mark documenting his manipulations, the abuse, the strategic control he exerted over Harper. His voice was clinical, calculating, devoid of empathy, revealing premeditation that sent chills through the courtroom. The judge's eyes widened. She exchanged a glance with the bailiff, who nodded subtly. Everyone understood that this evidence was damning. Mark's hands trembled. "Stop! This is illegal, he muttered, voice cracking. Fear replaced arrogance completely. Harper, calm yet resolute, didn't look at him. She was focused solely on Ranger, who leaned slightly into her hand, ready to react. The dog's alertness mirrored her own unwavering determination. The judge rapped the gavel lightly, still absorbing the gravity. "This court will continue listening to the recordings. No interruptions. Mr. Leland, you will remain silent." Jenna stepped closer to Harper, her voice low and steady. "You're doing perfectly. Stay with Ranger. Keep guiding him." Harper nodded, taking a deep breath. The fourth tape began to play, and the room went utterly silent. It was a chilling symphony of cruelty and control. Each recording peeled back layers of deception, exposing the full breadth of Mark Lelland's abusive strategies. Ranger's ears twitched at every word, his alert stance unwavering. The dog's training was precise. Recognition of behavioral patterns meant immediate confirmation. Every bark, every shift of weight, every slight growl sent a ripple of acknowledgement through the room. The courtroom was witnessing something unprecedented. A child's memory and a dog's instincts acting together as a cohesive, irrefutable validation of abuse. Mark's face went ashen. His lips quivered as if he wanted to shout, to object, to stop the exposure of his secrets. But the authority of the court and the undeniable evidence left him paralyzed. Every recording was a nail in the coffin of his carefully constructed identity. Harper had survived in silence, memorizing, observing, and preparing. Now, through these recordings and Ranger's confirmations, the truth emerged unassailable. Harper whispered again, almost inaudibly, "They'll know the truth about the locker, about everything." The dog barked sharply 3 times as if to say, "Yes, confirmed." Jenna's hands gripped the leash tightly. The prosecutor's eyes shone with determination, and the courtroom audience, lawyers, spectators, reporters, sat frozen, realizing they were witnessing something beyond ordinary comprehension. Harper's mother, Rachel, wiped tears from her cheeks. Her daughter's silence had once been a prison, but now that silence had been transformed into power, into undeniable evidence that would bring justice. She could see it in Harper's posture, in the deliberate calm that masked the whirlwind of emotions within. Harper had survived, and she was taking control. The 5th recording began. It contained explicit instructions, references to specific incidents, and even Mark's own admissions. Harper's lips moved slightly, whispering guidance to Ranger. "They'll see the proof, he can't deny it." Ranger's bark was sharp, deliberate, confirming the final pattern of abuse. Harper's whisper, combined with Ranger's alert, created a dual testimony that no adult could manipulate or refute. The courtroom hung in suspense, unable to blink, unable to speak, captivated by the unfolding revelation. Mark Lelland's shoulders slumped. His control had vanished completely. He had underestimated the quietest girl in the room, the child who had endured, observed, memorized, and waited. And he had underestimated the dog whose instincts validated every word. Now, his secrets, carefully hidden for years, were exposed to the world. Harper whispered softly, almost to herself, her voice barely audible but resolute. "They can't hide it anymore, not from anyone." Ranger leaned against her, steady, unwavering, as if to reassure her that she had survived the storm and was guiding the courtroom through the final, most critical revelation. The tapes had spoken. The dog had confirmed. The silent child had become a witness no one could ignore. The judge's gavel fell once, signaling the gravity of the moment. "This court has now heard the recordings. The evidence is clear. We will proceed with appropriate measures. Mr. Lelland, the court has no tolerance for obfuscation. This is the truth." Mark's hands trembled in his lap. Harper's eyes, steady and unflinching, met his for a fleeting moment. There was no fear in them, only clarity and resolve. And the courtroom knew. The quietest girl in the room had spoken, and the darkness Mark Lelland had tried to hide was finally illuminated. The storm was not over. It was only intensifying. The courtroom felt like it had contracted into a single, tense moment where every heartbeat echoed. Harper Green sat, still small in her corner, fingers lightly resting on Ranger's golden fur, absorbing the storm she had set into motion. The dog's body was taut with vigilance, every muscle responding to Harper's subtle cues. Outside observers might have thought it a quiet tableau, but the air vibrated with the truth of a girl who had endured, memorized, and waited for the right moment to speak, and it was breaking Mark Lelland. Mark's face was pale, lips pressed tight, hands shaking. The recordings had played, and every detail, every cold, calculated command he had issued, Every moment of manipulation and cruelty had been revealed. The courtroom wasn't just listening, they were absorbing the weight of his abuse. He had underestimated Harper completely. Her silence had been a trap he hadn't anticipated. Peter Lawson, his defense attorney, hovered beside him, muttering urgent directions. "You need to stay calm, stay calm." But Mark's eyes were wild, darting toward Harper, toward Ranger, toward the evidence they had orchestrated. Calm had abandoned him entirely. The judge rapped the gavel. "Order, Mr. Leland, your behavior is noted. You will remain seated. We will continue with proceedings. The court recognizes the gravity of the new evidence and its confirmation." Harper exhaled slowly, the tension in her chest coiling and uncoiling. She had endured years of manipulation and fear, but now, with Ranger by her side, she felt the quiet power of control. Her whispers guided Ranger, signaling the next steps. She leaned slightly forward, whispering, "Locker videos, all of them." Ranger's tail thumped deliberately against the floor, a signal so precise it sent a ripple through Officer Jenna Wyatt. "Yes," Jenna whispered under her breath, understanding completely. Ranger had confirmed the full scope of evidence Harper had memorized, and together they would ensure it was retrieved and documented for the court. Mark's panic escalated visibly. "No, you can't, those aren't," he choked on the words, realizing too late that the recordings, the locker, the evidence he had hidden for years, were now within reach of law enforcement and the child he had tormented. The prosecutor, Sarah Mitchell, rose swiftly. "Your Honor, we request immediate verification of all the evidence identified by Harper and confirmed by Ranger. The child's recollection and the dog's recognition leave no room for doubt. This will allow us to corroborate every detail of the abuse and manipulation perpetrated by Mr. Leland." Harper's chest tightened as she whispered again to Ranger, "The last one, the one he never wanted anyone to see." The dog barked sharply once, deliberate. Jenna's hands tightened on the leash. Harper had identified the final piece of evidence. The recording Mark had kept hidden, the one that documented not just abuse but the methods he had used to control and terrorize her, and to manipulate the dogs he had trained for aggression. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Mark's face drained completely. His veneer of control, already fragile, shattered entirely. "Stop! You can't! This is illegal!" he sputtered, panic overtaking his arrogance. Every eye in the room noted the sheer terror etched into his features. Harper had exposed him completely, and even the adults who had prepared for every eventuality could not conceal their astonishment. The judge's eyes were sharp and unwavering. "Silence! This courtroom recognizes the critical nature of the evidence. Mr. Leland, any further obstruction will result in immediate consequences. We will proceed." Harper's whisper guided Ranger once more. "Play the final tape, they have to know." The officers, following Harper's precise direction, retrieved the final recording from the storage unit. The tape clicked into the player, and the courtroom filled with Mark's voice, colder and more calculated than ever. His words, caught on tape, revealed not only verbal abuse but the meticulous manipulation of the dogs and the psychological control over Harper. Every directive he had given, every command to intimidate and enforce fear, played in stark clarity. Ranger's ears twitched at every sound, and his alert stance confirmed recognition of the abusive patterns. Harper's small hand brushed against his fur, steadying herself. She had endured this terror before, yet she remained composed. The dog's presence was her anchor, the recordings her validation. A collective gasp rose from the courtroom. The spectators, reporters, and even some of the lawyers could hardly believe what they were hearing. The evidence was undeniable, harrowing, and meticulously documented. Harper, the quietest girl in the room, had orchestrated its exposure through memory, observation, and the unique connection with a trained K-9. Mark's body began to tremble visibly. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape that did not exist. He had underestimated the resilience of the girl he had tried to control, the intelligence and loyalty of Ranger, and the determination of those who sought justice. His panic became palpable. Peter Lawson, desperate, attempted to intervene. "Your Honor, this is inadmissible. The child is being coached. The dog is responding to cues." The judge's gaze swept the room, firm and unyielding. "Mr. Lawson, the evidence has been verified by law enforcement. The child's testimony is consistent, and the dog's recognition has been observed and documented. Objections are overruled." Harper whispered again to Ranger, "Show them the rest. They need to see the truth." Ranger barked twice, deliberate. Officer Wyatt nodded, understanding completely. Harper had memorized the contents of each folder, each tape, each piece of evidence. She had cataloged it meticulously in her mind, ensuring that the truth would emerge fully. The team began reviewing the final materials in the courtroom, Harper directing each step. She indicated which tapes to play, which folders to examine, and which items contained the most damning proof of Mark's cruelty. Every instruction was precise, calm, and deliberate. For a girl who had been silent for months, the transformation was profound. She had become a guiding force, a witness, and an orchestrator of justice. The courtroom watched, rapt, as the last recording played. It revealed Mark's cold calculations, his manipulation of dogs, his strategic use of fear, and the deliberate terrorization of Harper. The reactions were immediate. Reporters scribbled frantically, the prosecutor's eyes widened, and the spectators leaned forward, stunned into silence by the clarity of the abuse. Mark's shoulders slumped. He had been confident, untouchable, but now every secret, every hidden act was exposed. Harper's voice, her memory, and Ranger's instinct had unraveled him completely. His panic was total. Harper pressed her hand gently against Ranger. "It's over, they'll know now." The dog leaned into her, steady, a living confirmation of every word she had whispered and every detail she had remembered. The courtroom felt electric, charged with the intensity of revelation and the weight of truth finally emerging. The judge rapped the gavel, signaling the end of the immediate presentation of evidence. This court recognizes the severity of the newly revealed information. The evidence is comprehensive and verified. Mr. Leland, you will answer for these actions. Mark's hands trembled in his lap. His confidence, arrogance, and manipulative control had dissolved completely. The quietest girl in the room had spoken. The dog had validated her words, and the evidence had been revealed. He had no defense, no escape, no shield against the truth. Harper's mother wept silently, overwhelmed by the courage her daughter had shown. Harper, small but unyielding, had reclaimed her power, directing the courtroom's attention with whispers and gestures, guiding Ranger to confirm every detail. She had survived, she had observed, and now she was delivering justice in a way no one could have anticipated. Harper whispered once more, almost inaudibly, "They can't hide from this, ever." Ranger barked softly, a gentle confirmation. Harper's eyes met the dog, and she allowed herself the smallest, triumphant smile. The quietest girl in the room had not only spoken, she had orchestrated a reckoning. The courtroom knew, without a doubt, that everything was about to change. The storm was reaching its peak. The courtroom felt suspended in time. Harper Green sat small but resolute, her hand lightly resting on Ranger's massive head. The dog's presence was unwavering, a living testament to the truth she had revealed. Every eye in the room followed the proceedings with a mix of awe, disbelief, and anticipation. Reporters held their breath, lawyers whispered anxiously, and the judge's gaze remained sharp, reflecting the unprecedented nature of the case. This was no ordinary courtroom drama. It was the moment when silence, patience, and courage collided, exposing darkness that had long lurked in shadows. Mark Leland's posture had collapsed entirely. His face was pale, his hands shaking as if the very walls of the courtroom pressed against him. The recordings, the folders, the verified evidence, all of it laid bare his manipulations, cruelty, and abuse. He had believed himself untouchable, confident that his secrets were locked away, inaccessible. But he had underestimated a 12-year-old girl who had memorized every detail, and a dog whose instincts confirmed every hidden truth. His arrogance had dissolved, leaving raw, unguarded terror in its place. The judge tapped the gavel lightly, calling for order. We will now hear final statements regarding the evidence presented. The court acknowledges the extraordinary measures taken to ensure accuracy and verification. Harper Green, your testimony, aided by Officer Wyatt and Ranger, has been invaluable. Please proceed. Harper's chest tightened. She had rehearsed this moment silently for months, yet now, standing at the precipice of full exposure, her hands shook slightly. She glanced at Ranger, who sat alert, ears twitching at every word in the courtroom. Drawing strength from his steady presence, Harper rose slightly, pressing her small notebook to her chest. She had been silent for too long, but this was her moment. Her voice would not tremble. She whispered softly to Ranger, "Show them everything, the last folder." The dog barked once, sharply, confirming. Harper's lips parted and the words emerged, not to the dog this time, but to the entire courtroom. He recorded everything, every threat, every lie, every time he made us afraid. He thought we wouldn't find it, but we did. The room held its breath. Mark's eyes widened in panic, lips quivering. Peter Lawson tried to interject, but the judge silenced him with a firm gaze. The child is allowed to speak. Harper continued, her voice growing steadier. He tried to make the dogs hurt me. He wanted me to be scared so I wouldn't tell anyone, but I remembered every detail. I know where everything is, and he can't take it away. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of years of trauma, fear, and courage. Every adult in the room felt it. The quietest child had become the loudest voice for truth. Ranger leaned slightly into Harper's hand, alert, confirming her statements as instinctively as if saying, "She is right." Officer Wyatt stepped forward, holding the final folder Harper had identified. The contents included the last recordings, documents, and visual evidence of Mark's manipulations. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "the child has guided us to this final evidence. All of it has been verified and cataloged. This confirms the totality of the abuse patterns and criminal behavior." Mark's breathing grew rapid. His mind raced, looking for escape routes, for arguments that might save him, but none existed. Harper had orchestrated the exposure with precision, courage, and foresight. Every move he had made to control the narrative, to hide evidence, to manipulate adults, had been neutralized. The quiet girl, the one he had underestimated, had anticipated his every tactic. The judge leaned forward, her expression stern. "Mr. Leland, the evidence is conclusive. The court will consider the recordings, the documented materials, and the verified testimony of Harper Green, corroborated by Officer Wyatt and Ranger. You will face the full consequences of your actions." Mark slumped into his chair, defeated. His arrogance, his control, his carefully constructed persona, everything had collapsed. He had counted on silence and fear to protect him, but the one person he had underestimated, the quietest girl in the room, had orchestrated a reckoning that no adult, no legal strategy, and no intimidation could prevent. Harper's mother, Rachel, wept silently, tears streaming down her face. She had watched her daughter endure months of isolation and fear, and now she saw Harper reclaim her power in a way that was unshakable. Harper had survived, endured, and turned her silence into truth. The prosecutor, Sarah Mitchell, addressed the court with a mix of awe and determination. "Your Honor, the child's courage and the dog's confirmation provide undeniable validation of the abuse. We request that Mr. Leland be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. This evidence is comprehensive, corroborated, and irrefutable." Harper whispered again to Ranger, "It's done, we did it." Ranger's soft, affirming bark seemed to echo through the room. Harper allowed herself a small, victorious smile. She had reclaimed her voice and the courtroom had listened. She had survived the manipulation, the abuse, and the terror, and now justice was taking its first, unshakable steps. The judge rapped the gavel decisively. This court acknowledges the bravery and precision of Harper Green, the verification of Officer Wyatt, and the contribution of Ranger. Mr. Leland will be remanded and will face charges according to the evidence presented. This is a rare and extraordinary case, but the law will be upheld. Mark's face went pale. He finally realized the full scope of the collapse. His secrets, the recordings he thought hidden, the manipulation he had relied upon, everything had been exposed. The quietest girl in the room had become the agent of his undoing. Harper exhaled, leaning slightly into Ranger. The dog nuzzled her hand gently, a silent reassurance that she had done what no one thought possible. She had transformed fear into action, silence into power, and trauma into testimony. The courtroom slowly exhaled, the tension giving way to awe, relief, and a sense of justice being realized. Reporters scribbled feverishly, lawyers whispered in disbelief, and the spectators watched the quiet girl who had orchestrated it all. Harper had not only survived, she had triumphed. Outside the courtroom, the world waited for the story to unfold. Headlines would soon announce the bravery of the child and the unique role of Ranger, the K-9 whose instincts had confirmed the truth. But for Harper, the moment was intimate, personal, a reclaiming of voice and power that no headline could fully capture. She pressed her forehead lightly against Ranger's fur and whispered, almost to herself, "No one can take this away from me, ever." Ranger leaned into her, tail sweeping softly against the floor, a living confirmation of the bond that had carried her through months of fear and isolation. Harper looked at her mother, tears in her eyes, and finally spoke aloud in a way that was hers alone. "I'm not afraid anymore." The courtroom, the media, the lawyers, and even Mark Leland felt the weight of that declaration. It was not just a statement. It was a culmination of survival, courage, and triumph over fear. Harper had endured the darkest parts of life and emerged, unbroken, as the quietest girl who had spoken the loudest truth. The judge's gavel struck one final time. This court recognizes the bravery and courage demonstrated today. Harper Green's testimony and the confirmed evidence have changed the course of this case. The law will proceed accordingly. Court is adjourned. As the gavel fell, a wave of relief and awe swept through the room. Harper rose slightly, looking around. The courtroom, once filled with tension and disbelief, now seemed smaller, as if the enormity of what she had accomplished had reshaped it. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a force, a beacon of courage and truth. Ranger nudged her gently, and she allowed herself a smile, small but full of quiet triumph. The storm had passed, but its impact would be felt for years. Harper had faced fear, endured abuse, and navigated the unimaginable, and emerged victorious. Mark Leland, once a figure of power and intimidation, was reduced to a man confronted by the consequences of his actions. He had underestimated a child who had spoken through whispers and a dog who had confirmed every hidden truth. The courtroom had witnessed the power of courage, intelligence, and silent resilience. Harper took a deep breath, finally feeling the weight lift from her small shoulders. She had reclaimed her voice, her power, and her life. And as she looked at Ranger, the dog who had stood by her, unwavering, she whispered softly, "Thank you, we did it together." The courtroom, though still buzzing with the enormity of the moment, understood something profound. Harper Green, the quietest girl in the room, had become a force that could not be silenced, a survivor whose courage had illuminated the darkness, and whose voice would echo far beyond the walls of that courtroom. Justice had been served, the truth had been spoken, and the quietest girl had finally been heard.